Hello students, welcome to the lecture on designing and planning transportation networks, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Understand the role of transportation, explain the transportation performance, define transportation modes, explain the transportation infrastructure and policies, define trade-offs between different types of accessibility, discuss on tailored transportation. Let's start with some introduction. Transportation is one of the most visible elements of logistic operations. The role of transport in national economy is very crucial. Every business firm, regardless of what it produces or distributes, requires a movement of goods from one point to another and therefore is involved in transportation. Transportation essentially concerns the spatial dimension of the business firm. The spatial dimension refers to geographical relationships and reflects the combination of firms with respect to their materials, sources, markets and competitors, plus the spatial relation of the latter to their sources and markets. Transportation utility. In economic theory terms, transportation's function is to create a place utility for the goods produced or distributed by the firm. The word utility means usefulness or ability to give satisfaction. Place utility exists when goods are in the place where they can be consumed. Now we will discuss the role of transportation. Transportation in production and marketing. In production, transportation function is looked after by executives of materials management department or general administration department or general department. A part of the transportation function can be tacked onto purchase of materials, but the total transportation planning concept requires higher in-depth skills and expertise than are contributed by a purchase executive who is even otherwise preoccupied with the responsibilities of his complex purchase function. Modal characteristic. Modes of transportation used in national and international logistic and supply chain management can be grouped under 5 models. They are rail, highway, water, pipeline and air. The relative importance of each mode can be measured in terms of system mileage, traffic volume, revenue and the nature of traffic composition. Each mode is discussed with respect to these measures. Motor carriers. Highway transportation has expanded rapidly since the end of World War II. To a significant degree, the rapid growth of the motor carrier industry results from door-to-door operating flexibility and speed of intercity movement. Motor carriers have flexibility because they are able to operate on all types of roadways. In comparison to railroads, motor carriers have relatively small fixed investment in terminal facilities and operate on publicly maintained highways. Rail network. Historically, railroads have handled the largest number of ton miles continental. As a result of the early establishment of a comprehensive rail network connecting almost all cities and towns, railroads dominated intercity freight ton age until after World War II. This early superiority resulted from the capability to transport large shipments economically and to offer frequent service, which gave railroads a somewhat monopolistic position. Railroad operation incurred a high fixed cost because of expensive equipment, track, switching yards and terminals. However, rail experiences relatively low variable operating costs. Water transport. Water is the oldest mode of transportation. The original sailing vessels were replaced by steamboats in the early 1800s and by diesel power in the 1920s. A distinction is generally made between deep water and navigable inland water transport. The main advantage of water transportation is the capacity to move extremely large shipments. Water transport employs 2 types of vessels. Deep water vessels, which are generally designed for ocean and Great Lakes use, are restricted to deep water ports for access. Pipelines. It operates on a 24-hour basis, 7 days per week, and is limited only by commodity changeover and maintenance. Unlike other modes, there is no empty container or vehicle that must be returned. Pipelines have the highest fixed costs and lowest variable costs among transport modes. High fixed costs result from the right-of-way, construction and requirement for control station and pumping capacity. Air transport. The newest but least utilized mode of transport is air freight. Its significant advantage lies in the speed with which a shipment can be transported. A coast-to-coast shipment via air requires only a few hours, contrasted to days with other modes of transportation. One prohibitive aspect of air transport is the high cost. However, this can be traded off for high speed, which allows other elements of logistical design such as warehousing or inventory to be reduced or eliminated. The factors that can be considered for the selection of international carrier are transportation costs. This includes rates, minimum weight, and loading and unloading charges. Transit time. It is the total time that elapses from the time the consignor makes the goods available for dispatch until courier delivers same to the consignee. Reliability refers to consistency of the transit time a courier provides. Capability refers to the carrier's ability to provide the equipment and facilities that is required for the movement of particular commodity. Now moving on to next topic, we will study the transportation performance. Whether the movement of material and equipment is by rail, sea, air or road. Adequate facilities for their free flow to and from the factory must be ensured. In general, the following activities are performed by the transport in logistics. Transportation facilities. Terminal facilities. One of the major activities of transportation is making terminal arrangement. Besides the trade growth in India, terminal facilities are usually reluctantly provided. The main reason could be of lack of infrastructural facilities. Fleet management. An important feature of movement of finished products of major projects is a type of vehicle used for movement. The vehicle dimension, capacity, type and special characteristic, if any, have to be examined with reference to the quality and quantity of goods to be moved. Key movers. The motive power utilized for the internal handling of vehicles and transportation to destination is another important component of the total movement system. Routing. Another important aspect of transport preparation is the route for streams of traffic, namely roadways, railways, waterways and airways. The goal of efficient fleet management is to ensure on-time deliveries and pickups while reducing costs. Solving the vehicle routing problem is critical to efficient fleet management. Transit time management. The relative location of a plant and the customer or suppliers determine largely the transit time of raw materials, spare parts and finished goods. Transit time generally never receive adequate attention in the planning of major projects. Distribution pattern. The pattern of movement of the finished product by road or rail must be planned properly. For example, when the requirement of the number of rail wagons are not to be worked out, it is not sufficient to take the average lead or distance for the whole country for calculating fleet requirements. Nature of product. Another aspect which is often disregarded by project management as well as the common carrier is the variability arising out of the specialized nature of products to be moved. The generally low level of sophistication in transport planning in the country has made it difficult for planners to appreciate the fact that transport capacity is influenced by the nature of goods, their packing and other specialized requirements such as special handling, equipment, etc. Asset tracking. In order to serve the customer, firms are in a position to update them regarding the progress in movement of goods. The technologies like GSM really provide an enormous information that allows the service providers to identify the distance covered by any shipments as well as its current location. Interstate goods movement. For a country's economy, the transportation sector is often viewed as an important barometer of growth. As more goods are consumed within a country, transportation sector must grow according in order to accommodate the transport of additional goods. For the interstate goods movement logistic part, a prime role can be considered as a tool for getting resources like products, services and people where they are needed and where they are desired. It is difficult to accomplish any marketing or manufacturing without logistical support. Documentation. When it comes to national or international transaction, documents are prerequisite. Carrying and delivery of documents has become a part of logistical services. For any company actively involved in foreign trade, the increased documentation requirement is a commonly heard complaint. Handling the amount of documentation required for international shipments can be a burden for even companies with sophisticated logistic management. Government regulation. The logistician who is planning or operating an international logistics system have to deal a vast number of legal regulation by governments that vary from democracies to dictatorship. These regulations can affect all aspects of distribution, ranging from packaging, marketing and documentation to the location of warehousing and manufacturing facilities. Regional differences. In interstate goods movement, finding regional differences is a common factor, pervasive factor. Heavy traffics, duties and taxes that governments place on imported goods often prove a hurdle to the trader. Regional differences, special zones and free ports eliminate this disadvantage for the benefit of both the exporting and the importing country. Transportation. Managing transportation for interstate goods movement that result from growing international trade creates new problems for the logistician. International shipments often originate in the interior of one country and have a destination in the interior of another. The logistician may have to deal with various transporters and several freight classification and traffic schedules. Let us now study modes of transportation. Transportation modes are defined as diversity of modes. Transport modes are the means by which people and freight achieve mobility. They fall into one of three basic types depending on over what surface they travel: land, road, rail and pipelines, water, shipping and air. Each mode is characterized by a set of technical operation and commercial characteristics. Road transportation. Road infrastructures are large consumers of space with the lowest level of physical constraint among transportation modes. Rail transportation. Railways are composed of a traced path on which is a bound vehicle. They have an average level of physical constraints linked to the types of locomotives and a low gradient is required particularly for freight. Pipelines. Pipeline routes are practically unlimited as they can be laid on land or underwater. The longest gas pipeline links Alberta to Sarnia, Canada, which is 2,911 km in length. The longest oil pipeline is a Trans-Siberian extending over 9,344 km from the Russian Arctic oil fields in eastern Siberia to Western Europe. Maritime transportation. Because of the physical properties of water conferring buoyancy and limited friction, maritime transportation is the most effective mode to move large quantities of cargo over long distances. Main maritime routes are composed of oceans, coasts, seas, lakes, rivers and channels. However, due to the location of economic activities, maritime circulation takes place on specific parts of the maritime space, particularly over the North Atlantic and the North Pacific. Air transportation. Air routes are practically unlimited. but they are denser over the North Atlantic, inside North America and Europe, and over the North Pacific. Intermodal transportation concerns a variety of modes used in combination so that the respective advantages of each mode are better exploited. Although intermodal transportation applies for passenger movement, such as the usage of the different but interconnected modes of a public transit system, it is over freight transportation that the most significant impacts have been observed. Telecommunication cover a grey area in terms of it if they can be considered as a transport mode, since unlike true transportation, telecommunication often does not have physicality. Yet they are structured as networks with a practically unlimited capacity with very low constraint, which may include the physiographic and oceanic masses that may impair the setting of cables. Modal competition, a general analysis of transport modes, reveals that each has key operational and commercial advantages and properties. However, contemporary demand is influenced by integrated transportation systems that require maximum flexibility. As a result, modal competition exists at various degrees and takes several dimensions. Modes can compete or complement one another in terms of cost, speed, accessibility, frequency, safety, comfort, etc. There are three main conditions that ensure that some modes are complementing one another. Different geographical markets. It is clear that if different markets are involved, modes will permit a continuity within the transport system, particularly if different scales are concerned, such as between national and international transportation. Different transport markets, the nature of what is being transported, such as passenger or freight, often indicates a level of complementarily. Even if the same market area is serviced, it may not be equally accessible depending on the mode used. Different levels of service. For a similar market and accessibility, two modes that offer a different level of service will tend to complement another. The most prevailing complementarily concern cost versus time, passenger or freight. With some exceptions such as buses and pipelines, most transport modes have developed to handle both freight and passenger traffic. In some cases, both are carried in the same vehicle, as for example in the airlines, where about 80% of the freight is transported in the cargo holds of passenger aircraft. The main advantages of joint operation are high capital costs can be justified and amortized more easily with a diverse revenue stream. The same modes or traction sources can be used for both freight and passenger, particularly for rail. The main disadvantages of joint operation are location of demand rarely match. The origin and destination of freight are usually quite distinct spatially from passenger traffic. Frequency of demand is different. For passenger, the need is for high frequency service. For freight, it tends to be somewhat less critical.
A major consideration in the design and management of the supply chain is transportation. Transportation cost and service punctuality vary significantly from one mode to another, and thus the availability and choice of transportation and the design of the supply chain are intimately related. Transportation may be categorized into four fundamental modes: air, road, sea, and rail. Air transportation is very expensive. It is typically limited to high-value cargoes that are lightweight. Air transportation is characterized by very fast speeds, high fuel consumption, which is why it is so expensive. Air transportation is also not point-to-point, which means that another vehicle, usually a truck, is necessary to pick up and deliver the freight. Road transportation is the most common mode of transportation by count of individual shipments. It is less expensive than air, but it is not the cheapest transportation mode. It is characterized by medium, average highway speeds, moderate but still significant fuel consumption, and is definitely a point-to-point delivery mode. Transportation by ship or by river barge is the least expensive of all transportation modes. However, transportation by water is very slow, typically 10 to 15 miles per hour. On the positive side, Water transportation requires very little fuel. It can occasionally be point-to-point, but usually requires connections with other transportation modes. Finally, rail transportation offers a significant compromise between road and sea. In North America, rail moves more than 40% of the total freight volume by weight and distance. Rail transportation offers medium speed, comparable to trucks. It has low fuel consumption, much lower than trucks, but not as low as ships. Rail is still frequently point-to-point, but intermodal rail freight allows a combination of rail, truck, and ship to serve those customers not located on railway tracks. Choice of transportation mode concerns many factors: the cost of the movement, the speed of delivery, and whether or not the transportation mode is suitable for the volume of freight. However, the greatest factor from a supply chain perspective is the reliability of the mode. That is, how much variance is there in the delivery schedule? Generally, larger freight shipments tend to be less predictable, and vice versa. Low-cost transportation also typically implies less predictable, more variable delivery schedules. Transportation choice is fundamentally related to inventory. Inventory is a buffer, a cushion to variable, unpredictable transportation. However, inventory is also a cost that increases with higher inventory stocks. Thus, the supply chain is composed of two significant costs: transportation and inventory, and these two expenses are frequently in conflict with each other.
Let us now discuss the transportation infrastructure and policies. Transportation modes serving agriculture have experienced strains over the last 5 years. The current capacity for storage trains, loading inceptions, ships, port capacity, etc. will be inadequate to meet projected demand for US feed and food products from China, India, and Southeast Asia. According to Economic Survey 2002 to 2003, Government of India industry has experienced a significant revival with growth of 5.3%, which is also reflected in free traffic movements in major ports, airports, and railways. The drivers of change are technology, global competitiveness, benchmarking to the best international practices, and India is taking full advantage of all the three factors. The industrialized countries have appreciated the IT revolution in India. Growth sector. The country is passing through a phase of saturation in manufacturing sector. Future growth can be in health services, hospitality business, technical education, telecommunication, IT, and financial services. There is a tremendous scope of growth of hospitality business like hotel and tourism. Contribution of transport. With the changing economic scenario, factors such as globalization of markets, international economic integration, and removal of barriers to business and trade and increased competition have enhanced the need of transportation. It is one of the most important infrastructure requirements which is essential for the expansion of opportunities and plays an important role in making or breaking the competitive positioning. Transportation, like all industry, is largely influenced by information and communication technologies, with the focus being on knowledge of customer needs and value-added services. Surface transport is provided by the road and the Indian Railways. Cargo road transport is entirely in the hands of the private sector. The importance of transport in national economy has been enumerated below. Transport is the basic service for increasing national income. As national income rises, infrastructure adopts to support changing patterns of demand with the shares of power, transport, and communication. Transport helps to create new economic activity. Economic development in a country requires adequate and effective transport services. The degree to which transport creates new activity may depend upon equally necessary condition within the economy. Transport system is the indicator of development in a country. One of the major indicators of development of a country is the existence of high-quality transport network, availability of number of mechanized motor transport, adequate number of railway, air and shipping services as per the demand of the user. Transport is the key factor to link dispersed, scattered areas. As a sector of the national economy, transport is characterized by long-range investment, much of which is devoted for creation of basic facilities such as rail tracks, roads, ports, air terminals, shipbuildings, and repairing yards. Transport provides large employment opportunities. Growth of various modes of transport provided employment to millions. People can be employed in road construction activities, port development activities, railways construction and service activities, in shipping trade and other related transport activities.
When organising the transport of humanitarian items, or indeed any goods by air, there is often a long chain of companies between the logistician sending the goods and the owner of the aircraft being used to transport them. Most of the time, the owner of the plane will never be revealed in documentation seen by the logistician, and sometimes even the name of the company operating the aircraft will not be known by the client. Let's look at the reason for this. Here is our logistician. She could be working for an NGO or other humanitarian organisation, for a national government's aid department, or for a peacekeeping organisation. Let's say that she's working for a medium-sized NGO who wants to send emergency shelter non-food items, NFIs, within 24 hours to a country in Africa. One option is to get the supplier of the NFIs to be responsible for the transportation of the items. In this case, depending on the deal with the supplier is not necessarily obliged to inform the NGO which company it contracted to deliver the goods. In any case, it is most likely that the supplier themselves would use a broker. More on that in a moment. Another option is to use a freight forwarder. Often these are large international companies who have their own fleets of aircraft. However, in some cases, they themselves may lease planes from other air cargo operators. We can come on to air cargo operators in a moment. So let's get back to the broker. A broker works for a company that can organise air cargo services on a client's behalf. As brokers are specialists in aircraft chartering with an expert knowledge of the aviation industry, many NGOs rely on a broker to arrange cargo flights for them, particularly in emergencies. The broker uses its contacts to offer the NGO a short list of companies available to transport the NFIs. Once a decision is taken, the broker arranges a contract with an air cargo operator. An air cargo operator is the company responsible for flying the plane. They will have an air operating certificate issued by a civil aviation authority which permits them to operate the aircraft. They should also have all the other documentation relevant to the aircraft, such as the insurance certificate. However, that operator may not be the usual operator or owner of the aircraft. The operator may have leased the plane from another company. If this is a wet lease, then the second operator has provided not only the aircraft, but the crew as well, on a long or short-term lease, and that operator will have most of the documentation, such as the insurance certificate. To complicate matters further, the second operator may not actually own the aircraft itself. The aircraft may be owned by another company, the main figure behind a whole network of companies, which may even include both the operators. If the plane has been involved in arms trafficking or destabilizing commodity flows, then the owner of that plane will try to obscure their activities through the use of front companies and bank accounts registered in countries with weak financial regulations.
Let's move to next topic. There are inherent trade-offs between different forms of accessibility. This occurs because roadway design and land use patterns optimal for one mode are generally less suited for other modals. Highways designed for maximum vehicle mobility have poor accessibility, few off-ramps, driveways or cross streets, while roads designed for maximum accessibility, many driveways and intersections cannot safely accommodate higher speed traffic. Land use patterns that maximize automobile access. Low density development with activities located along arterials and highway intersections tend to have poor transit and no motorized access, while transit-oriented development, cluster development with limited parking and good pedestrian access may increase traffic and parking congestion. Wide roads and higher traffic speeds tend to create barriers to walking, so vehicle and pedestrian street design objectives often conflict. Tailored transportation is the use of different transportation modes and networks based on product and customer characteristic. Most firms sell a variety of products and serve many different customer segments. A firm that sells office, supplies and furniture will have a very different tailored transportation strategy than a firm that sells bulk oil products. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Transportation function is to create place utility for the goods produced or distributed by the firm. The major activities of transportation are making terminal arrangement. Besides the trade, a growth in inter-terminal facilities are usually reluctantly provided. Transport modes are the means by which people and freight achieve mobility. They fall into one of three basic types depending on over what surface they travel: land, road, rail and pipelines, water, shipping and air. Tailored transportation is the use of different transportation modes and networks based on product and customer characteristics.